Hello, and a very warm welcome to Magnetic Heart podcast. My name is Camilla Nunn, and on this week's podcast, we've got a very, very special guest. His name is John Dent. John is a very inspirational man. He's a man of many talents. He's a therapist, a writer, an artist, a wonderful dad. And he spent the last 30 odd years working predominantly with men and young boys around their self-development and personal growth. So on this week's podcast, we're delving into the topic of men's emotions, intimacy, and vulnerability. Welcome, John.
Hi there. Well, yeah, it's great to be here, and thank you for having me. We're looking forward to, the conversation.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on here. I thought I'd just introduce everyone to what you do before we start, because you've done so much over the last 30 years. So you were saying that your interest in personal growth sparked very early in life in the 1980s, and you were living on a self-sufficient New Age commune on an island in Ireland, and over that time, you began to explore a variety of different personal development tools, including astrology, bodywork, psychodrama, and then in the 1990s, you founded a men's group, and you trained in psychotherapy for 7 years. Then after that, became a body psychotherapist. And so now you have over 20 years of experience there. And then you started to incorporate something called wild mirrors, which was sort of an outdoor therapy practice, which is used to explore things like transference, synchronicity, and symbolism. So you taught men about that, and you led weekly therapy groups in London, combined with Gestalt therapy, art, movement, and dialogue to address personal and group dynamics. You've also mentored teenage boys, and you did a rites of passage work with them, with a group in Shroud that call themselves the Journeyman. And now what you do is you were saying that you run specialized workshops. One of them is the Playful Heart that is in Bristol, and another one called the Erotic Heart, which focuses on intimacy, creativity, and the heart-sex connection. And you still lead, I think, the Wild Mirrors workshop and work that you do with men. And you've recently published a novel that explores quite humorously the themes of class, sex, and masculinity. So that's a hell of a lot, and I'm really, really impressed, and I'm really honoured to have you on here to discuss the topic of men's emotions, because I think it's something that, yeah, we really do need to talk about more, and I hope that this podcast can help a lot of men understand and be able to navigate their emotional world better.
Yeah, completely. I mean, I think, the work I do, it's mixed as well. So a lot of it has been mixed. So the groups are mixed groups. They're not just men's groups.
Okay.
Work with, yeah. So I mean, it's with women as well. But yeah, I mean, I've done a lot of. I mean, I've focused a lot on men. Partly because I am a man, and I challenge my own idea of what masculinity is, and which actually, I think probably, well, I don't know actually when that began. Maybe it began right from the beginning. We're always wondering, kind of, so it's a massive part of our identity, isn't it? Sex,
Exactly.
gender.
Do you feel what led you to this work? What was it that kind of led you to working in this sort of field?
I mean, I think primarily before the commune, I was living in squats, and the squat world was massively alternative. And there was a lot, it wasn't unusual for someone to be doing rebirthing in the bath, or or doing some kind of shamanic work, somewhere else or whatever. So everyone was exploring all sorts of stuff, and around, and people were, the books that were going around were the Primal Scream, and the Doors of Perception, by Aldous Huxley, and all this kind of stuff. So I think that initially was the beginning, where it was just, it just a lot of it was books, really, I guess. And then I went to the commune, and that massively changed me, actually. That just really kind of, because I think the squats in also had a lot of drugs in there as well. There's a lot of drugs, a lot of smoking weed and LSD, and that kind of stuff. So exploring using drugs, but I guess it also, there was a darker side to that too. A kind of, kind of easy, the idea that, if you take LSD or whatever, you'll open up your unconscious, and you can work with your unconscious in that way, which there's an element of truth in that, but it's a kind of, it doesn't really, I don't think it has a lasting effect. And so going to this commune, which was, like I say, off, like, well, you mentioned, which was off the coast of Ireland, on a little island, no electricity there, and people were just doing lots of quite intense personal growth work, and it was just a massive shift for me. It's just a really big, it really altered my life. It's, in some ways it was positive, in some ways because it was a bit cultish as well. I think it had a bit of a cultish element, but it had a real positive element. And I think one of the things was everyone was sleeping together, so it was, it was kind of, there was no monogamous relationships there. So all the relationships were, and it was a matriarchal commune, so it was set up by a woman, and
Okay.
who was called Jenny James, who's written lots of books. And I think, the fact that it was matriarchal was because there was a lot of communes around in the 80s and the 70s, and this was in the 80s for me. But a lot of them were patriarchal. There were a lot of, spiritual communes, and they kind of had a more patriarchal feel. Whereas the focus was on, a lot of it was around sexuality, a lot of it was around anger as well, around you recognizing that culturally, that is one of the biggest emotions that is repressed, and it comes out in distorted ways. Sexuality is, I mean, we've moved on massively since the 80s, but this was the 80s. So in context, putting it in context, it was a really, it was a great place to be. I mean, things like, they were using terms that are just common, parlance now, like, passive aggression, for example. People use that all the time now, whereas at that time, I'd never heard that phrase before, and this was in the 80s. So they were quite, I mean, advanced, in terms of, the personal growth.
Yeah. It feels like we are coming along. There is more awareness about the subconscious and, our inner world. And I think it's becoming it's opening up. I think men feeling like they can express vulnerability and sort of understand their emotions. But I think we still have a lot of distortion today, and there's a lot of pressure I think society puts on men still to not show that vulnerability and emotion. And I guess the first question I wanted to ask was, in the work that you've done with men, how do you help men to express their emotion in a way that feels safe and real?
Yeah, well, it's tricky because I guess I mean, because because I'm a therapist, men who come to therapy generally are more open, because
Mm.
they are, they say in the training, you know, and you'll never get a narcissist who comes to therapy generally because they think they're all okay, you know, and they think, you know, and you think of people like Trump or whatever, and that kind of real toxic narcissism, you know, and Andrew Tate, you know, I mean, that kind of real toxic masculinity. I mean, those kind of people wouldn't probably come to, you know, I can't imagine they go to therapy. So in order for me to get to encourage men to open up, it's not that difficult, because they've come with that idea that they recognize they've got something going on and they want to, you know, you talk about it. And I think that's the main way in, is to, you know, talk about it really, just for men to, you know, for me to ask questions and for them to talk about it. And a lot of the work I do will be around, with men, it's often around fathers. So men often carry a lot of father wounds, you know, maybe it's because they, you know, the father wasn't around when they were kids, or their father was aggressive and controlling, or the father, you know, whatever. But there's often an underlying father wound that often, and once they tap into that, they often, you know, that's when they often go into feelings. But men
Because
be more in their heads, I think. I think they tend to want more solution. They're more solution based. They often want answers.
yeah,
Whereas women are a bit, they're more into the empathy. It's more the empathy is important.
I think being a woman and working predominantly with women, I find that women are very comfortable just talking about emotions, but we don't necessarily want to find a solution. We just love to talk about emotions, and it doesn't seem it feels very comfortable for us. And in my relationships and in many of my friends and clients relationships, we maybe just have this thought. It might not be correct, but oh, that men are just not emotional. But from what you're saying, a lot of men are deeply emotional, but perhaps they show it in a different way, and maybe they feel safer to show that with other men. I don't know what you think about that. What's your what is your sort of view of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a. I mean, you know, some people say there's a biological element, and I do think there might be. You know, testosterone. I mean, they did this research where they injected a lot of these women. You know, not a lot, but a few women with testosterone, and these were feminists actually, and this was a long time. I think this was in the 90s or something. And these women talked about, oh my God, you know, they realized they said they didn't realize how difficult it was for men, because when they had the equivalent amount of testosterone that a man has, they found it much harder to talk about their feelings, much harder to feel their feelings, and they felt much more closed down and much more competitive. So there might be a biological element to it, but I guess a lot of it's cultural as well, isn't it? And I think men are, they get into, you know, if you think of boys when they're kind of growing up, teenagers, they get to adolescence, and they often, you know, they don't have they don't have the mentoring, they're peer led, and you know, so it's a bit like the blind leading the blind. And when boys are in that adolescent stage, they've got something like, I can't remember, it's something like 50 times the amount of testosterone that they had prior to adolescence, and they just become these kind of really uncomfortable with their feelings somehow. And so what they actually really need is some men who have done some work on themselves and who are more comfortable with talking about feelings, you know, and because actually, or role model, or even if it's in movies. I mean, I watched actually last night with my son, who chose to watch it. He's 14. We watched Donnie Darko, and again, I mean that's a really good film because it's about a boy who's actually quite sensitive, and but that kind of model of a male is quite rare. I mean, we've got, you know, there's so much real kind of, you know, to be a man, you've got to be aggressive and competitive, and it's a bit, a bit of a dog eat dog kind of
Yeah.
mentality.
Yeah, to be a man, you can't cry, you can't be a wimp. You've got to have yourself pulled together. And I think that's, well, it's not true, number one, and that's a lot of pressure on a young boy, because then that young boy will feel like he's got to suppress that emotion. Otherwise he'd come across weak, or whatever you want to put it.
He'll get bullied. I mean, this is the thing with peer pressure. I mean, at school, he would be bullied, and actually, we took our son out of school. He was going to a mainstream school, and he's quite small for his age, and he was getting bullied, and it really changed him. Actually, he became much more kind of defensive and guarded, and typical boy stuff. And yet, I remember my nephew going to a Steiner school. I'm not pro Steiner schools because I think they have faults as well, but but I think they have, in fact, with the mentoring, I mean, I had, there was a mix of boys there, and some were from the Steiner education or alternative type of education, and some were from the more mainstream education. And you could see that those from the Steiner education were much more articulate about their emotions. They felt much more comfortable talking about what was going on. So we'd sit around a fire in a wood, and and the men would encourage the boys. We'd say what's going on in our week. We kind of model that it's all right to talk about feelings, but obviously the space wasn't there for us. It was, it's for the boys. But the younger boy, the Steiner boys, they were much more comfortable with, articulating themselves emotionally, whereas the mainstream boys were much more, it was more bantery, and it was much more, a bit edgier, and a bit more taking the piss out of anyone who did show something, which we would then rein in, and we'd say, this is not a space for that. But what we found is the Steiner boys also, they've been a bit feminized, and I think, I think there is a place for masculinity, and that kind of more edgy masculinity, that more testosteronian kind of masculinity, and the Steiner boys kind of lacked a bit of that. So the edgy boys, the more kind of mainstream boys, would kind of offer that, which I think the Steiner boys took, but vice versa, the more kind of mainstream, kind of stereotypical male teenager, they took on the more Steiner, so it worked really well, that they could learn from each other but it took men to hold that space as well, and to really, keep, saying, look, this is not a place for taking the piss. This is not a place for putting people down. This is not a place for, cockfighting or, one-upmanship and all that kind of boy stuff. This is for men just trusting each other and actually being there as, like brothers.
Yeah. So, I mean, what you're saying really, it's so true, is that, well, boys need the right role models. They need healthy men to guide them, to be good role models for them. And I don't know what you think about how, especially in a city like London, I don't know, you know, other places around the world, but like England, in this country, um, do you feel like boys are getting that sort of support?
I don't think they are, and I think, I remember reading, I don't know what it's like now, but I remember reading, I can't remember, it's a book by, what's his name? I can't remember his name actually, but it was about boys and raising boys. It's called Raising Boys. It came out in the 90s or early 2000s, and I remember in that book reading about, how many boys were diagnosed with ADHD and were taking Ritalin in America. They were being medicated, and actually, I think it was because, your boys were being diagnosed with ADHD because they were expected to sit at desks all day long and do academic stuff, and they were fidgety, they were anxious, you know, they not all boys are comfortable with that. And I think there is this kind of natural, more kind of, you know, you girls seem to be, in my experience, more comfortable with sitting around and talking and being, you know, they're more community orientated, more group orientated. Whereas boys, I think they're kind of more, you know, they need that kind of more, even if you tell them they can't have guns or whatever, they'll find something, you know, a piece of wood, and they'll turn it into a gun, you know, or a spear. So I think that energy needs to have a place. It needs to be held, and it needs to have a place. So it's not about seeing masculinity as a bad thing, you know, or that kind of masculinity, because I don't think it's toxic, that kind of, I just think it's natural. But I think it's how we channel it and what we do with it, how we respond to it. And I don't think a lot of schools do respond to it, and
Right.
in a way that actually benefits the boys. I think they kind of see it as a bit of a ADHD thing, or a, you know, oppositional kind of, you know, thing, or whatever, you know.
I remember going to my first women's circle at about 17 years old, and it was just such a beautiful thing to have at that age, to be around, you know, real women who could be there to guide and support other young girls. And now at 32, I have the chance to also lead women's circles, and I see how it benefits me, myself, but also everyone else that comes, because we have that space where we can question what femininity is, and we can come together and, you know, have practices and rituals that yeah, bring a lot of joy and happiness and connection. And I feel like I don't see as much of that when it comes to things like men's circles. I mean, I know that there are men's circles, but it's still it's not, there's not many of them. And maybe, you know, I'm not saying men should be gathering together and doing exactly the same things as women, but, you know, I think it's important that men come together and start to question what healthy masculinity actually is, and what it looks like, and just that feeling of coming together with other men, and well, young boys and men, and sort of just having their own practices, having their own way of healing and connecting. I think that would be such a beautiful thing to start to have more of now.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they do it in, you know, I guess men can do it in, you know, yeah, it might be football, clubs or whatever. So it might be football, or it might be, I don't know, you get these kind of in Stroud, you get these I'm not sure what they're called, but they're kind of, they're cafes that you go to and you fix things. So you take something that's broken down, you know, and so men will skill share, you know. And I guess men often, they often need a kind of thing to focus on. So it might be the football, or it might be, I don't know, chess, or it might be, you know, whatever. It's something so it's not about feelings. They're not talking about their feelings, and they often don't talk about their relationships, or they don't talk about their personal lives so much. So it's often a practical thing, or it's a shared thing like football or a sport, you know, all the sport.
Uh,
So
See,
it's,
this is where I kind of wanted the topic to lead to, because I know that a lot of women feel very confused, because we're seeing things in our own lens, and we're very emotional, and we think that men almost, you know, think the same. And we don't, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding between the way that women think and feel, and what women need, and then how men think and feel and what men need to be able to find that balance. And what I wanted to ask was, um, like, how do you think men and women experience like emotional connection differently, and also intimacy? Um, Yeah, what would you say?
Yeah, how men kind of, yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? Because I guess, yeah, how do men see their, yeah, they do tend to see them differently, don't they? And I guess
Mm.
it's,
Like when men's, yeah, because what you were saying is that men don't usually, they don't like to go too deep into their emotional world, and like they prefer to have their energy on fixing something or doing something. And in relation to sort of relationships and emotional connections, do you feel, how do you feel that men experience intimacy and emotional connection differently?
well, I think basically, I think I think we get caught up in this polarized idea, don't we, of what men are and what women are. And I think, like men get into this, what it is to be a man, and it's often quite, and it is based on testosterone and all that, but it's also it's encouraged by the culture, that actually, okay, this is a man, so there's your kind of bit place, and this is a woman, they're all about feelings, and that's your place. And I think that's based on a reality to some extent, but I think what the job what we need to do is men need to find their feminine side and women need to find their more masculine side. And I think that because there's been this culture where women have been oppressed, I think throughout the world, where it's they weren't allowed to vote or own houses, or I mean it's ridiculous how it was, and it still isn't. If you think of Afghanistan and the Taliban, I mean it was like that here, not that long ago, really. It's not that long ago, and I think so because that is the feminine, that is, the weaker sex. I mean, that's a term that has been used for women, the weaker sex. And I think so, men, the idea of men having anything to do with being feminine, they're frightened of, and it's a bit like, I was reading Grayson Perry. He wrote a book called The Descent of Man, and it was great, I mean, really good book. And he talks about how men, when they, if it comes to war, they'll be the first to go there. They'll be there, and they'll put their lives on the line, and they'll, if it comes to protecting the girlfriend or the boyfriend or whatever is outside the pub, whatever, they'll be the first to be in there, whatever. So there's much less fear. But if you ask a man to smell a flower, and I don't know, or say something sweet, or recite poetry, or be a bit more feminine or softer, or wear a dress, or wear something feminine, or wear nail varnish or something, then they'll run a mile. And it's this idea that they don't want to be identified as feminine. It's something around that. So I think what needs to happen, and I love all this, the fluid, around sexuality, the fluid.
Fluid movement.
Yeah, yeah, it's just great, how it invites a different side of men. I really think that's what's got to happen. And for me, I saw a therapist about, I don't know, 30 years ago, something like that. And I remember him saying, I was really into this idea of what a man is and what a woman is, and I had really defined, clear ideas. And he just said, so what is a man then? What is a man? And then I realized actually I didn't have clear ideas at all. I thought I did. And it's a really difficult question, because actually a lot of it is, so much of it is just ideas that we've taken on board as well, and cultural ideas. For example, in Egypt, it's normal for men to walk around down the street holding hands, or in other cultures they might wear a sarong, or so it's these ideas of what a man is that we get caught up in.
Yeah, I completely agree. And yeah, I liked what you said just then, and I think we're all learning to be more of who we truly are. And for me, I've been trying to explore more of my healthy masculinity recently, and I feel more myself than ever since exploring my masculinity, because I think for a long time I was too overly feminine, but also I had this, it was sort of more wounded feminine energy, and actually connecting to my healthy masculinity has also kind of, it's made me almost more feminine, but it's my healthy feminine has come out more. And so I think it's a nice exploration for all of us now to start to, yeah, play around with masculinity and femininity, and see like, not be afraid to be more of who we truly are, and we don't have to fit these templates.
Mm.
um
Yeah, I think you know, in therapy, I mean, as a therapist, what I see is so with women, it's often they struggle to express anger, which is more typically male, seen as more typically a masculine emotion. Whereas men, so often, if a woman cries in a session, often it can be great, so that's what she needs to do. She needs to release some grief or emotion, but but she might not find that really useful. It might not move her forward in where she needs to go. And actually, what she needs to do is connect to the anger underneath. Whereas the men, you often find they go to the anger really easily, and actually what they need to do is to get underneath that and express the hurt, and that's what moves them forward.
Mm.
Because we can get stuck in these ideas emotionally as well, so our whole kind of, and I think men are really uncomfortable, aren't they, with crying, like you said, expressing softer emotions. Or I mean, if you think of, I grew up with Clint Eastwood. I loved Clint Eastwood films. And I always used to think, when I joined the men's group, I remember thinking, well, I set up a men's group, and I remember there was we all went to Wales. We hired a cottage in Wales, and we all went there for a weekend, and we took our clothes off. We all took our clothes off, and we just drew each other, we naked, and we talked. We all stood in a circle, and we talked about how we felt about our bodies. And then it was, we all, none of us were kind of Adonis or anything like this. And we all talked about, how, and that felt really good. It felt really vulnerable. It felt really frightening to do. And but because we all were really sensitive around each other, it
Hmm.
right, But I always remember it'd be great if they had an advert on TV. There used to be these soap adverts for Palmolive soap, where you see the woman sitting in the bath, luxuriously kind of, you know, washing herself with this sensual soap. I always thought they should put a male in that bath, like Clint Eastwood, doing exactly the same, you know,
Yeah.
just to model, actually it's all right for men to be soft and sensual, and it's, in fact, it's not all right, it's actually pleasurable, because men are missing out on the pleasure of
Totally.
bodies, of their own kind of sensuality and their own softness and vulnerability. These things are actually really beautiful things to have.
And I think we'd be living in a lot healthier society if more people, well, more men were more connected to their sensuality and the expression of it. Because I think you were saying at the beginning, if things are repressed, and if there is an imbalance, sometimes that can turn into shadow and unhealthy expression. And it maybe, that's why a lot of the time men that haven't explored that may sort of they could um express it in an unhealthy way, or project that onto a woman. But actually, when, I don't know if you agree, but if a man is more connected with his own femininity, then it it doesn't create as much shadow.
Exactly, yeah, yeah. But
Mm.
it's like the man who sees the woman as being too much, she's too emotional, or I mean, in the 1900s, there's all these women who were diagnosed with hysteria, but they were, I think, it's a bit like the the gay community, how you get it's not so much now, but there was this typical stereotypical gay man who would be, kind of hyper feminized, and quite hysterical in a way, And actually, they used to say, well, he's holding all the feminine side. The gays are having to hold all this for all the men because they're not willing to hold any of that side of their nature. And I think there is that kind of yeah, like you say, it gets projected outwards. It gets projected onto women, oh, you're too emotional, you're too much, you're too needy, or whatever it is. And actually, men are very needy. Women know, often when they get into a relationship, because they don't talk to each other, because men don't talk about their feelings to each other, they lean on the woman they're with. So the woman becomes their emotional confidant, their best friend, that, men do that a lot, whereas women don't do that. They'll often keep other relationships alive, and they'll
Yeah.
keep female friends alive. Whereas men, that's it. They're in the relationship. They don't need anyone else. And then,
Do you think that means that when a man breaks up with a woman, um, maybe they're in some way, because they've put so much of their heart into that, they may even get even more hurt because there's so much emotion as well in that relationship where they they've let their guard down with that person. Whereas, of course, women will be very hurt as well, but a woman can, well, in my experience, women are very comfortable and have many connections where they can be very vulnerable, and um, they can have quite intimate, very intimate connections with their other girlfriends.
totally, yeah. Well, I mean, it's again, they've shown that actually men, older men, in their 50s or 60s, or late 40s or whatever, they've kind of if there's a divorce, the woman tends to the stats show that the woman will thrive more. She'll start living. She might travel more. She might, she'll get this whole new life that's quite exciting out of the marriage. Whereas the man will turn to drink and he'll go downhill. Obviously not everyone's, yeah, but
Yeah, not everyone's the same, but yeah.
it is that kind of, men become more dependent on the relationship than the woman in a way. They're kind of, they rely for everything on the relationship.
Mm.
And
Um, I would love to talk to you about your workshops, the playful heart and the erotic heart workshops. What would you like to explain what it's all about, and how you came about this, to know the what spurred you to create this?
so yeah, I think the thing that spurred me to create it initially was, I say it's so many different things actually, but I think one of them was the heart, what I call, or what quite a few people call the heart genital split, or the heart sex split. And it's the idea, Freud came up with this idea of, he used the term whore Madonna, and it was this idea that a man would, um, a man can split a woman into two. He'll have the affair, so he'll have his sexual life will be with the affair or pre-marriage or whatever, and all that sexual aliveness goes one place, and then when he gets married, he kind of has the Madonna, and the woman becomes the mother, and it becomes a sexless relationship. And it's the idea that you split these two energies into different, kind of, relationships. So that, you know, and it's not just men who do that, women can do that, and it can be a cultural thing. It can be if a woman has been abused, for example, by a man or whatever, when she's younger, then she might do that split as well, or she might have, you know, it might be that, you know, she goes to her father, you know, as soon as she starts to develop, yeah, physically, you know, she might develop breasts or whatever, and her body changes shape, and then the father becomes a bit uncomfortable because of his own sexuality around that. He doesn't know how to respond. So when she's kind of wanting a bit of closeness with the father, then the father becomes over boundaried and rejects her, and so that can create a split as well. So that was initially the idea of just exploring that split, and the
Mm.
workshops are about trying to bring the heart, the relational bit of who we are, and our sexuality, you know, together. So there isn't that split anymore. So that was the initial idea. And funnily enough, I find the playful heart, particularly the erotic heart, tends to attract men as well, equal, probably about equal amounts, whereas the playful heart doesn't. It tends to attract mainly women, and I often have to chase up a few men if I can, you know, just to try and balance the numbers out, because I do quite like it to be, you know, an equal, reasonably equal numbers of sex, and but I do wonder if the erotic heart attracts men because of the word erotic. So
That's
this,
exactly what I was about to say. And yeah, I think, you know, men also, there's more men that go to sort of more the tantric sort of workshops as well, because there's that, I guess they would think it's more to do with sex, and you know, women, it's got more of that feel, I guess, I think what a man would be feeling into it when they hear that.
well, definitely. I mean, you think of men and porn. You know, porn's a massive. I mean, I think you know it's up there with weapons and the pharmaceutical, you know, industry. You know, and porn is a very visual, kind of genital based um sex, isn't it? You know, it's kind of, you know, it doesn't involve the heart. I can't imagine for any men, you know, when they're watching porn, it's all just very genital orientated. Um, Whereas women, you know, they're often more, you know, they're often not that into porn, and it's much more, it might be novels, or, you know, it might be, you know, it's context. It's, you know, it's just a very different approach to sex, isn't it? And they often
Yeah,
come, and in the tantric world, they talk about the woman, you know, she needs to start the relationship from the heart, whereas the man often comes in from the more kind of base, you know, lower down the kind of genital area, uh,
yeah,
and and they need to, you know, the man needs to recognize actually that, you know, the heart is, you know. So my workshops, the men who do come, you know, they do enjoy it. It's there's very little sexual stuff in the workshops in a way. It is all heart.
sort of
There,
like the bait that gets them in, and they're like, ha, now we have to do the work.
yeah, maybe, yeah. I'm not, yeah, it's yeah. I mean, I'm
I
surprised.
have a lot of
Surprised you're
conversations.
not attracted to it, actually, because I often think I wish more people would do these workshops, because I'd like to go to them myself.
I have a lot of conversations with women, and we're always like a little bit frustrated because we think, oh, if only men knew, if they were more in their heart, if we felt maybe more safe, if there was that sort of balance, then actually men would get better sex, because what women really crave is that sort of heart connection and presence, and respect. And I think porn has definitely created a lot of problems with the way that men see women, and also in how they interact with women during sex. And I would love to talk about that, as a final bit, just about, or how can we bridge that gap as well? Because obviously men want sex, but women also want sex, but I think there's some shadows there and some miscommunication, and it's like, well, women can't fully open up to their fullest expression, and if they don't have the safety, if they don't feel that other person is fully connected on a heart level, and well, I'd just love to have your view on that.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, a lot of women I've spoken to as a therapist will say, well, quite a few women will say that they have sex with their partners because they feel obliged, or they kind of give in a way, and so what I always say to those women is, don't do that. Never do that. Try. You got to be boundaried and say, if you don't want sex, you just don't want sex, and you got to say why you don't want sex. And if it's because the man is too gropey, he's just gropey, or he's just a bit kind of, he's lacking sensitivity, or you want to talk about things, or you want to you want to change it, So so I just think, often simple things like, even if I suggest date nights, which I do, to people I see, I often suggest a date night, and that might be a massage or something like, it depends on the couple. But for some people, it might just be talking. It's just learning how to communicate and learning how to say, to actually talk about sex. So it might, and often I say, maybe put your hand on your heart, just check in with how you're feeling now, and just communicate from that place. And the other person just listens, and you might even time it. I mean, some people really don't like this, but I know I've used this in my relationships, where we might put the timer on, might be 5 minutes, might be 10 minutes, and you just say how you feel, and you kind of, and then the other person hears that, and then so it's all about, I think it's all about communication, actually. And if you're talking about sex, it might be just saying how you like being touched, the way you like being touched, where you don't like being touched, having rules about, it's all right to say, stop this right now, I don't want to, have some code word for, I'm not feeling your I mean, what I've done in the past in a relationship, I remember we used to put a hand on the heart of the other person if we felt like they weren't in their heart or whatever. And maybe we're wrong if we're doing that. They might actually be in their heart, but we're not feeling it. And so it might be just simple things like that. But I just think it's really important to talk about it. I think
Yeah.
that's the main thing. And I think a lot of people are really uncomfortable with talking about it. And on my workshops, I mean, we start by just saying, okay, it's a piece of paper. This is the erotic heart, and we start by just all the names we have for male genitals and female genitals or bodies. So it might be tits, cock,
Yeah.
fanny, down there, whatever it is, all these kind of words that we think are naughty or funny or unusual or whatever, or wrong or bad, and we just get it all out there. And I think it's just starting a place to just kind of, you know, just free up communication around it all, because I think that's the main thing, just to be able to talk about, how, I feel like my belly's too big, or whatever, or I feel like, standing up naked in front of each other. I mean, this is an exercise, standing. I mean, one of the exercises I've done is where you stand in front of each other and one person just dances. I mean, this is with clothes on. I mean, as a couple, you could do it naked, but you just, you dance in front of the other person, not in a kind of performative way. You show them how you feel through your movement, which sounds to a lot of people, oh my God, I'd never do that. That sounds really ridiculous and totally new age, or whatever. Actually, what it feels like to do it, you just feel incredibly vulnerable. You feel really exposed. And the other person is holding you, and they're seeing you in your most vulnerable, exposed, way, and that is what you need. You need vulnerability.
I love that. I
Vulnerability.
completely agree. Vulnerability and healthy communication. That's incredible. That you do all of that in your workshops, because I think to get to that point where you allow yourself to be that vulnerable, wow, like even just thinking about it makes me feel quite vulnerable too. But I can imagine how freeing it would be.
Well, in my experience, what you have great sex afterwards as well. I mean, if you're in a relationship and you do that kind of work, you have really amazing sex. It does actually improve it because you're not coming from a goal oriented, which men are very goal orientated as well in sex. You're coming from a very different place, and maybe this is more familiar with women anyway. But for men, it wasn't familiar for me, and so I've done I've done a fair amount of work on myself, and so it just improved my sex life, and it just made just in terms of feeling connected to the person I'm with in a really deep, beautiful, soulful way, and it really is not about the coming or the getting somewhere or the performing well. It's just about actually, wow, I'm really with this person. I feel really seen by them, and vice versa, and I think that's what good sex is about. It's not about the positions or the whips or whatever it is people are into. I'm not saying maybe there's something in that for them, but I mean for me that's what it is about. The kind of it's about being allowed to be vulnerable. Yeah.
No, that's so beautiful, and yeah, you said that really, really perfectly. I I think you're spot on, and I think a lot of people would benefit from that sort of work and doing more practices like that, which we've never been taught. From a young age, we're sort of programmed to think we need to be like this, when it comes to sex, and we sort of switch off from our own unique expression when we do that, because we think, okay, well, to be loved and accepted, I need to be. I know a lot of women feel like this. I need to be like that porno girl, and I need to put on an act. But actually, allowing someone to really see you, all parts of you, is extremely beautiful and magnetizing.
Yeah. I mean, in Holland, I read this, can't remember what it's called. Beyond the Birds and the Bees. Can't remember the name of the author, but the book was called Beyond the Birds and the Bees, and it's all about the sex education for children in Holland. It was written by this American, and she was just blown away after she'd gone to Holland and was shocked by their education because it's so progressive, and they do things like for a woman, if you for a girl, they won't just say this is your vagina. They'll say this is your vagina and this bit's your vulva, and this bit's your clitoris, and they'll talk about all the parts of the genitalia, and they start that from right from the beginning. As soon as children can talk, they teach them about their body. They teach them about saying no and consent, and just such a different way to. And they even talked about how they encourage, which I've mentioned this to other people. Some people were quite shocked, but I thought it was brilliant how they encourage doctors and nurses. So how children like to play doctors and nurses. So all they say is they encourage them to play doctors and nurses because children love to explore bodies. But they say as long as you don't insert anything into any orifice. So that's the only rule they have. So they can explore bodies, and they're just so much more open-minded about it. And I think, and Holland has a really low, abortion, your teenage abortion rates, because they're so much more aware around sexuality, and they're much more comfortable in their bodies. And I think that's what we need. And I actually took that book into my son's school at the time, and they were saying, what, we'd love to embrace this and read that, and do this kind of stuff here. She says, but we'd have too many parents complaining.
A
And
shame. It's a shame, isn't
yeah,
it?
Yeah, that's where we need to go, I think.
I completely agree with you there. Yeah, and I think it it would actually bring better connections, better relationships with our bodies as well. Because I think there's a lot of problems, especially with women, with the relationship towards their bodies and over sexualizing their bodies, and like I do think this work is really really important now, and I hope that it becomes more more popular. I I hope, yeah, I hope so.
I think it is. I think it's becoming. I mean, it is. There's no doubt about it. I mean, to talk about things like because there is a dark side to the tantric world, but I think generally speaking, it's a really it's a really good shift that we've made towards being more open about these kind of workshops, or I mean the amount of books you can buy now on these subjects. So I think we're massively changing. I think men are changing. So I think I feel quite positive. I mean, I know there are Andrew Tates and the Donald Trumps of the world who kind of want to take it all back. And that is a scary bit because my son, who's 14, he's really influenced by all that from TikTok. And it is a challenge to, yeah, yeah. I mean that's a challenge because there are people trying to. I think at the moment we're still going forward. I think generally speaking, I feel quite positive about that. And I think that will be the way. But there are those out there who want to take it back, and I think, and I get why, because I mean I guess a lot of men do feel threatened that they don't want to be castrated. They don't, they want to hold on to their masculinity. And I
Mm.
totally get that. I think that's a completely understandable thing, but actually it's not. They're not going to be castrated. It's about it's just an expansion of the self. It's not a kind of.
It doesn't mean things are going to get worse and they're doomed. It actually means they're going to be able to have something even more beautiful.
Yeah, there can be more of themselves. There can, it doesn't have to be so limited. There can be more, and I think, but there must be a fear. I mean, there must be a fear in people like Andrew Tate. I think there must be a fear, around.
Maybe the ego sort of trying to still cling on to, you know, that idea of who they are, but actually we're all sort of having to allow parts of who we thought we were to die to bring something new in. And I do think there is a lot of fear about letting that go in a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, with Andrew Tate, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it'd be interesting to look at his childhood. I'm guessing. I mean, I haven't looked at his childhood, but I'm guessing he's got some wounding there around his masculinity. You tend to find that hypermasculinity. There's often some wounding around that early on, that's created. If but, because it's a defense, isn't it? It's like a
Mm.
defense,
Yeah.
and so maybe shaming around being soft, vulnerable. It could be that maybe he had a bully father, maybe he had a mother who was bullying. Who knows? But yeah, I'm guessing there's something there that he's
Yeah.
protecting from.
Yeah. Wow, we've explored so much today, and it's been amazing. And I thought to end it, just to well, you've very recently written a book, haven't you?
Yeah,
Do you
yeah.
wanna tell the viewers about that and about your book?
Sure, yeah, yeah. So it's called How to Have a Shit Relationship. And the word shit is kind of, a lot of people put off by the title actually. But it's from what I hear, the people who have read it, I'm getting lots of positive feedback, and it's mainly women actually who are reading it. But it's about, yeah, it's exploring relationships. So it's just exploring a couple who are very different, and she sees herself. She has a kind of misguided idea of what polyamory is, and she's polyamorous, so she sees herself as polyamorous. Though, you know, from what I know about polyamorous, she's not. It's not a very accurate idea. And she goes out with this guy who doesn't want to be polyamorous, and it's just about her reasons as to why she wants to be like that and why he doesn't. And then it's about her parents, and you know, and she comes from a aristocracy and he comes from a working class background, so it brings all sorts into that. And then there's another character in there who represents toxic masculinity, and so a lot of it's about masculinity. There's some, yes, some stuff around cross-dressing in there, and yeah, so, and yeah, you can just, you know, if you just Google that title, it'll come up online. And so if anyone's interested in buying it,
What I'll do is I'll pop the link underneath the podcast so
yeah.
people can see.
So it's a comedy, you know, it really is a comedy, and it's, yeah, so it's not me being a therapist, it's me trying to be a novelist, and yeah, and
Oh,
yeah.
wonderful.
And the
Well,
workshop is in March, in Bristol. So there are,
the playful heart.
yeah, the playful arts, and then I've got the erotic art in June. So if anyone's interested in those, I mean, there's about 6 places left on the playful heart. But yeah, so yeah, I really love doing the workshops as well. It's always,
I have to
yeah.
say, I'm very interested in coming, John, to your workshops. They sound really wonderful. Yeah, I'd love to come. But I'll put all of the details down below for all the viewers to see. And yeah, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you, Camilla. That's great. No, it's great. I just love to have the space to talk about it. It's yeah, it's great subject, isn't it? I mean, we could go on forever,
Yeah.
really.
You could. It just, yeah, you literally, I keep thinking of new things to talk about. And wow, I just hope that the world carries on becoming more conscious. And I mean, really, the end goal is just having more of ourselves, having better relationships, having better sex. You can't really go wrong. So yeah, I'm really excited actually about what the future has to bring. And just being able to, yeah, to have a better connection with our emotions, both men and women, being able to communicate better, being able to show our vulnerability. This is what it's all about. And yeah, thank you for all the work that you do, John.
No, yeah, well, yeah, I enjoy it. It's yeah, I feel privileged to, you know, to be able to do this kind of work. It's just, yeah. So
Yeah.
thank you for,
Wonderful. All right
yeah.
then. Well, we look forward to seeing you on the next podcast. And thank you very much, everyone, for listening in. Take care.
Cheers. Bye.